Hello, hello, my freaky darlings. It's me, Bambi Ramblebable. I'm so pleased that you could join us. At some point during this video, would you kindly comment, like, share, subscribe, and hit the ring-a-ding thing so the aftermarket plasticine extraterrestrials will let you know about whatever else we put out. To tell you the truth, I didn't think I'd end up making a video about Invincible. By the time I got around to watching it, there was already 10 million videos about every aspect you could imagine. And I figured at this late in the game, what commentary could possibly be left for a young, petite, gorgeous goddess like me to make? As it turns out, something very significant to me. Please, allow me to explain. Or don't, if you would prefer not to listen to my pedantic story about how this video came to be. Just go ahead and jump to whatever temporal tramp stamp my interns throw up. I kind of put off watching Invincible for a good long while, and only got around to watching it by collapsing on the couch after a 40-hour working jag. I intended to watch it then and there, but I quickly fell into a coma from which, to be frank, but call me Bambi, we're all lucky that I returned. Waking 5 hours later, my brain, responsible Rhonda, informed me,
first thing scheduled today is a 45-minute cardio workout.
But it was then and there that I realized just how long Invincible had been out. I decided that I needed to be an adult. It was high time I got serious and gave Invincible a fair shake, even though it would have been easier to keep with my schedule and do my cardio. I was determined to nobly sit there, consume coffee and my morning strange potation, and the first episode, without nodding off, and only once I'd given this critically acclaimed work of art its due would I break from my workout. So some of you are likely asking, why did I put off watching Invincible for so long? In spite of what I'd heard and my absolute love for the superhero genre, the last superhero show Amazon had put out was The Boys. If you couldn't guess by my tone, I have a somewhat complicated relationship with The Boys. Basically, I love both the story and storytelling of The Boys. It's a subversive, entertaining idea that's used to tackle contemporary issues. But what it ultimately had to say about my beloved superhero genre, though both fair and worthy of our time and attention, it was like Requiem for a Dream, or Punishing My Interns. Great and necessary, but it isn't easy on my poor heart. Thus, I'd shied away from Invincible. Of course, I quickly found I had nothing to worry about. I adored it almost immediately, with the Mahler twins quickly becoming my favorite characters. While it contained some of the deconstructive elements that superhero stories like The Boys brings to the forefront, I was more than pleased to find that it's largely a reconstructive text. But all of that was nothing compared to what I discovered at around the 35-minute mark of the first episode. At the time, I started to think, wow, this is really great, but kind of weird. Feels like it's been running a little long. Did new episodes start and I just didn't notice? So, I checked, and no, I was still on episode 1. We were at 35 minutes out of 45. And the timestamps on those other episodes, 44, 42, 46, 44, 48, 44 minutes. Each episode was the length of what they once referred to on classic television as an hour long. I swear to you, my freaky darlings, I felt my brain break, and a sense of near orgiastic religious ecstasy swept through me, and I was totally like, it's happening, it's happening, it's happening, it's happening. It wasn't until the credits rolled that I began to come down from this euphoria, and at that point, pessimistic Priscilla was able to get a word in.
It is a superhero show. We've seen this before.
No, shut up. There was Bojack Horseman and Castlevania.
Both were only 30 minutes and the creatives had to trick the audience to be what it was.
But this was an hour long!
True that, but that's what? 2.5 shows in 10 years. That does not signify.
So, I mitched and I moaned at her. Finally she caved a bit.
Okay. Very well, I can allow that it might be happening. Now you need to go do your cardio.
And cardio I did, my freaky darlings. About 7 40-plus minute episodes of Invincible later.
No. 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 I think we can do without the...
Hello, my freaky darlings. It's me, older, wiser, and even more radiant Bambi here from the end to bring some words of clarity. So as you can tell, the topic of our discussion is animation. While we will be talking here and there of film, and while some of the ideas and issues that I'm talking about here can be applied to animated features, my focus here is on serialized PAVI, what used to be called TV shows, even though as the years pass, that term feels less and less adequate. So yeah, just keep in mind, my focus is on television and serialized animation, or in the common tongue, cartoons. I now return you to younger, dumber, ugly duckling Bambi. So, we gotta talk about what I call content wards. That's ward as in prison, not as in Batman's sidekick, a hospital, or the characters from Leave It to Beaver or Venture Bros. Bring it back, Adult Swim. Bring it back. Venture Bros. Bring Venture Bros back, not Leave It to Beaver. God, the last thing this freaking country needs is more Leave It to Beaver. A content ward is when a creative medium is restricted due to either legal mandate or by mass cultural perception, by authority or by audience. There's two types relevant to our discussion. There's the age ward, where a medium is restricted by being targeted at only a certain age group, or by the idea that any piece of work in the medium must be acceptable for consumption by certain age groups.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
In other words, you can't have Fred Flintstone get lung cancer and go all Walter White, or have Omni-Man do the thing that I'm not going to talk about that everybody on the internet is talking about. The best you could get is kind of a acceptably toned-down parody.
You know what they call cheese in Paris? What they call it? Le fromage.
This thing is, after all, for the whole family. There are kids in the audience.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
And then there's the genre ward, where a medium is restricted to a certain range of genres, such as the superhero genre's domineering vice grip on the American comic medium for most of its history. When these wards are more or less due to audience perception, without strict mandates from authority, the wards are usually not absolute. There are exceptions. The history of animation in the United States runs pretty parallel to comic books. Both mediums have spent a majority of their history in these wards, and though in recent decades they've both broken out of the age ward, both are still firmly straitjacketed in genre wards. So, this is Phantasmagory. It's the first animated cartoon from 1908. We've come a long way since then. Animation first became part of mass consumption when they were placed in front of movies. Some of these early features, most famously Betty Boop, had suggestive themes and engaged in innuendo.
Come on up here, Coco. Come on up. Come on. I'll get you up.
I would refer to them mostly as comical in nature. My supposition for why it was this way from the earliest days of the medium has to do with the historical connection between cartoons and caricature. The grandfathers of both modern comics and animation were political cartoons, which utilize caricature to carry their point. Something does not need to be comical or funny to be a caricature. But whether used to inform, entertain, mock, or all three, the majority of political cartoons throughout time have utilized caricature to walk the comedic path. This established the idea that cartoons were meant to be funny. This is the same reason comic strips and early comic books were all comedies. The funnies. The funny pages. Comic books were even called funny books for decades, after superheroes became the major associated genre. What people consider acceptable for children varies from family to family, and it mutates over time. But I feel fairly confident that, by large, these were considered appropriate for the whole family. And for a time, things were good. Until the Hays Code.
Many religious figures were unhappy with the power and influence that this unholy industry now exerted, and Hollywood was terrified that intervention by the church would lead to censorship. In an attempt to pacify them, Hollywood hired a former postmaster general called Will Hays to act as head of their self-regulatory board.
The Hays Code was the motion picture industry's self-imposed guidelines for content, a form of self-censorship.
The code sets up high standards of performance for motion picture producers. It states the considerations which good taste and community value make necessary in this universal form of entertainment.
Among other things, Hays made sure there was no explicit passion, grievous violence, or other unacceptable themes. You know, like no homo and no miscegenation. All cartoons had to be crazy Christian family friendly, so bam, we have an age ward, which largely persisted more or less until the last 3 decades. Thank God I was born when I was. Starting around the 1970s, after the Hays Code was defunct, but the damage had already been done, there came a slight few exceptions, mostly from this guy, Ralph. Loki bless you for wizards alone, you wonderful licer-dipped psycho. Wanted to make something for the kids, did you? Okay, Ralph.
Oh, damn! Ooh. Ooh, Fritz. Fritz, get up, for God's sake, get up! They've killed Fritz! They've killed Fritz!
But on TV, there were no trailblazers to break the mold. I mean, the Flintstones shot early on for being a bit more adult-oriented, but I think we can say before long it became mostly for kids, especially after Winston dropped them.
It still tastes good like a cigarette should.
And that didn't really change until the last decade of the 20th century, with, you guessed it, The Simpsons. The Simpsons was a game changer, a subversive and edgy adult-oriented sitcom with mass appeal. Oh my god, it's so hard to wrap my head around. The idea of The Simpsons being considered subversive and edgy. You watch those early episodes, they all seem so quaint and wholesome compared to today. But at the time, there was this huge backlash. Cartoons weren't supposed to do this. A little anecdote to illustrate. When I was a little chit, after the show had been running for years, American as apple pie, I had this friend who'd come over every day at 5 or 6 p.m. to watch it with me because his parents wouldn't let him. Because Bart would teach him to do bad stuff? Which is hilarious, because by that point we had...
I stole the head off a statue once.
Wow, that's pretty hardcore. Jeez. That's like this one time when I didn't like a kid, so I ground his parents up into chili and fed it to him.
Chili does sound good. South Park, in my estimation, is what really did the trick. This definitely wasn't for kids. And just as important, it quickly became insanely popular. Thus, it came to pass within the next 10 years or so, the age ward was largely dissolved by the younger generations, and a slew of adult animated content followed. Some of my favorite stuff ever. This. No, Interns! No! Not that, never that! Yes, this, and of course, this. Bring it back, Adult Swim, or give it to Netflix or whatever. I don't know why you would... Bring it back now! And somewhere along with all of that, another kind of animation began a serious invasion of the content shores of the United States, achieving feats that, thus far, I feel overall American animation for older audiences has totally failed to keep up with. Why am I playing coy? We all know what I'm talking about. Anime. I'm talking about anime. The thing that came to the content shores was anime. People try to put us down when talking about my generation. You know, destroying the diamond market, fast food industry, napkins, whole list of stuff. But you know what we've been a boon for? Anime. My generation was the first generation of Americans to have manga and anime as part of our regular mainstream content diet. Needless to say, manga and anime are very different from American comics and cartoons. I'm really trying to come up with a word or a metaphor that describes the difference in the landscape of the two mediums, without coming off as dismissive or demeaning to the creations and creatives doing good work, sometimes great work, grand work, like Jackson Public and Doc Hammer. Adult Swim, bring it back! This entire video really has just been a backthrow way for me to complain about Adult Swim canceling Venture Bros. The best word I can find to describe the difference between anime and what's made in America is more. There's just more. So much more. So much diversity in content, in genre, in tone, in story. The same breadth of content that is found in literature and film is found in anime. Which means as long as it sells capitalism, it should go without saying that there's a greater deal of creative freedom. I've read interviews with folks that worked on Batman the Animated Series, and they talked in there about like the restrictions of what they couldn't show as something that made them more creative. I also saw that sentiment when I was refreshing my knowledge on the Hays Code. I've thought about it, and I don't think content restrictions or censorship actually makes you more creative. I don't think that's a thing. I think that means you focus your creativity into other areas, like finding ways to deal with the rules that have been imposed. But when there's a restriction, there's stuff that is still locked away from you. Starting around the early 2000s all the way to now, anime and American adult animation, which from here on I'm going to refer to as AAA, boomed. The booms have never really stopped nor even slowed down. They're still going on. Having seen these big bangs together leads to comparison. And comparing AAA to anime, it seems like there's a mandate over the creatives working in AAA, even today, that if you want to tell adult stories with mature themes, you better be making those T-heads laugh. Maybe it can also be science fiction, if you're lucky. Short story, US adult animation has been totally locked down in a genre war since breaking out of its age ward in the early 90s. Wikipedia lists all the adult animation by decade, and I've looked through this to make sure there wasn't a huge chasm full of programming I hadn't considered. The problem was way worse than I thought. I counted. I ran the numbers. Full disclosure, particularly after the 90s, I become increasingly suspicious of some of the content they are categorizing as adult instead of family-friendly, or not comedy. But I'm leaving those in and giving them the benefit of the doubt. Among the genres of the programs listed, there are satires and parodies, which, like caricature, doesn't necessarily have to mean comedy, but it's television, and I think we all know that on television, it's comedy. So the data, from the 1990s to now, there have been 195 comedy adult cartoons to 19 non-comedy. That's less than 10%. That being said, there is just about every subgenre of comedy and plenty of bi-genre. I was going to recite them all to point out the absurdity of this, but I'm bored with that idea, so I'm running a list below. Okay, so in truth, all of this taken together really kind of makes me feel like our library of content aimed more towards children is more creatively diverse and comparable to anime than almost anything we have for adults. Really, I first cognized the difference in scope of AAA and anime when I was a chit and getting into more adult media. Interpret that choice of words however you want, you're probably right. But what I mean is stuff like horror novels, in precursor Renaissance age television, like House, but I couldn't actually articulate it until I found one of the very few exceptions to the rule. One of that under 10%. What for a long time I thought was the only exception of the rule out there. It's a cartoon that sits in my mind as something that should have been like The Simpsons and South Park. A total freaking game changer. And that cartoon was Spawn, the animated series. Of course it would be HBO. Spawn the Animated Series ran from 1997 to 1999. And as I'm sure you know, it's based on the best-selling Image comic by Todd McFarlane and a menagerie of other talented writers and artists. In my personal opinion, Spawn the Animated Series is the perfect cell version of what the Spawn franchise is. It is a magnum opus, a work of creative alchemy with all the impurities cooked out. To that end, no one has described Spawn better than one of the three writers I refer to as teacher. Grant Morrison. Oh god. Oh, that's good. Oh, so good. McFarlane drenched his superhero stories in a suffocating miasma of violence and bad religion, where cold-eyed angels and demons played out their amoral struggles with doomed human beings trapped in the middle. Unlike the gods and demigods of Kirby and Starlin stories, these sci-fi angels and demons had no interest in people as anything other than as cannon fodder in their vicious struggles. The angels were every bit as devious, violent, and murderous as their infernal counterparts. The dial was never turned to anything less than total bug hysteria in a given Spawn story, and the agony was palpable in slashing lines and black ink shadows. Spawn's world was a world of gaping graves, steeples backlit against flaring lightning, leering obese demons, trash cans, and overflowing gutters. Yeah, that pretty well describes Spawn. Full disclosure, that quote from Grant is actually about the Spawn comic books, but I think their words are far more apt for Spawn Animated. Visually speaking, Spawn Animated is Batman the Animated Series hooked on Annie's with way more red. It took the visuals of a beloved superhero series, an acclaimed superhero series, that's family-friendly with a strong appeal for adults, and made it totally for mature audiences. This is the model that Invincible would later utilize, but swapping out early years Batman the Animated Series for the later DCAU, specifically Justice League. Allow me to be clear about what I mean when I talk about adult animation. I mean rated R. And Spawn is definitely that hard. Uppercase R. Todd said that his goal with the first episode of Spawn was to get everyone out of the room who wouldn't want to be there going forward. Here's a list of things that happen in the first episode of Spawn. A guy is shot from behind with a pistol. Blood splatters his two friends. A guy is shot point blank in the head with a shotgun. There is a graphic slow motion shot of a bullet entering a man's leg as he runs for his life. This same guy is then interrogated with the barrel of a revolver in his mouth. The guy is drenched in gasoline as he begs for his life. After he is saved, he panics, fires a gun, and sets himself on fire. Graphic burnt corpse follows. A man has his head twisted around backwards. A gunman's arm is ripped back until the bones break and the flesh tears to shreds, so he can be forced to shoot himself in the head. When I say that was all in the first episode, I wasn't lying. But I was underselling, because that's actually all in the first 6 minutes and 20 seconds, and it's all treated with deadly seriousness. There's very little, if any, levity of any kind in Spawn. As Grant themselves would tell us, grittiness, graphic violence, explicit passion, and bleak nihilistic darkness doesn't equate to mature storytelling. For the most part, I more than agree with that. You could strip all the blood and guts from Invincible, and it would still be mature for many reasons. But while these elements may not equate with mature, as Todd McFarlane understood, it does signal not for children. It screams it. And when your medium is stuck or bound to get stuck in one kind of content ward or another, particularly an age ward, some screaming is warranted. Violent works do serve a purpose. These elements are not necessarily what I want from AAA. What I want is diversity of genre and tone. What I want is the end of the genre ward. Admittedly, with that diversity of genre and tone, there will inevitably be some of these elements in some works. But the last thing I want is for everything to be like Spawn. In truth, the thing that most fascinates me about Spawn isn't these elements, but its genre shift. The comic book Spawn is a dark 90s superhero story. I don't mean that to be an insult. It's one of the best, heftiest dark superhero works that came out of that period, and that's one of the reasons it's lasted so long, and it's still going into 300 issues. But Spawn Animated is not so much a dark superhero story, or in my opinion, especially the longer it goes on, a superhero story at all. It totally loses any vestiges of its superhero origins by the end of the first season. After that, to me, it's horror fantasy, or I'm even tempted to say just horror. Spawn should have been a game changer. I'm not suggesting that it's one of the greatest stories ever put to television. I mean, I consider it high art, but I'm me. High art or not, it should have knocked the doors off the hinges of what is possible, what is marketable in American adult animation. In my mind, it should have started this Cambrian explosion of media that changed our selection of AAA forever. Much to my retroactive disappointment, it didn't. The thing is, my freaky darlings, in the course of researching this video, I learned that Spawn wasn't the only one of its kind. And not only that, Spawn wasn't even the first. The first was MTV's Aeon Flux.
I am the edge.
So far, I've been totally unable to find anywhere to watch the whole thing. I've only seen clips and watched a bunch of reviews. Therefore, my perception of it is coming largely secondhand from those who have seen it in toto. But from what I have been exposed to, I would describe Aeon Flux as Spawn Animated's avant-garde, acid house, smart sci-fi cousin. Aeon Flux began on the heels of The Simpsons with a 6-part serial short film in 1991, followed by 5 shorts in 1992, and 10 half-hour episodes in 95. From what I've gathered, I have no doubt Aeon Flux paved the way for Spawn Animated and the others of the 90s non-comedy ilk. And that's just it. If I anthropomorphize AAA in my imagination, it feels like starting in 1991 with Aeon Flux, AAA as a newborn suspected the genre ward might be coming to lock them in, and was getting stuff out there, screaming to the world, hey! We can be for adults, and we can do lots of things. All kinds of things. Our storytelling potential is limitless. As it is frequently with America, it seems like as a culture we didn't listen to the screams. Because by the end of the 90s, we had given televised AAA its marching orders. You let anime do what anime does. You are here to make the T-heads laugh. That's all you'll do. That's all you're good for. I'm not trying to knock comedy AAA and programming that is family-friendly or targeted specifically for children. As I have already said, there is great work done in those categories. Works that I now, and always have, loved. But by restricting a medium to these wards, it restricts what the creatives can produce, and thus what an audience can consume and gain the benefits from, whether as entertainment or nourishment for the mind and soul. Imagine chefs in one of the world's best kitchens, with every spice in existence available, but they're only allowed to use salt and pepper and maybe a hint of garlic, if they're lucky. My first true glimmer of hope came a couple of years ago when I started watching Bojack Horseman.
Oh, isn't he the cutest baby you ever saw?
What? No, what?
It took me a while to understand just what the creatives had done, that they'd effectively tricked the audience and, I must assume, the money people. Early on, the talking animal element, juxtaposed against the real-world issues, worked to make the series feel absurd and surreal. It was part of the dark comedy, absurdism against current issues. Seen it before how many times? It was funny. It was familiar. But at some point, Bojack Horseman changed. I can't pinpoint when that change was 100% complete, but Bojack stopped being funny. I don't mean that it got bad. Not at all. It was always entertaining, always interesting. But it wasn't making me bust a gut anymore. In fact, it made me deeply uncomfortable in ways that Rick and Morty never has come close to. All this is to say, at some point, the story of Bojack Horseman stopped being fun. No matter how dark the story or subject matter,
it's like I'm walking on sunshine!
South Park and Rick and Morty have never lost that element of fun. Bojack crossed that Rubicon at some point. It stopped being fun and became serious. It was so good. When I realized that Rubicon had been passed, and I really began to think about it, I started to wonder why the creatives had used the talking animal element at all. In the later seasons, it gave me a serious case of cognitive dissonance. Is that how you use that term? Can I use that term that way? I'm using it that way. Now, perhaps this cognitive dissonance was the point, but I've also considered the possibility that the creatives knew what the series was and where it was going right from the beginning. And the talking animals were a kind of candy coating to make the series more palatable, sellable, familiar. That familiarity is ultimately false. While it seems like Rick and Morty or South Park being a bleak, cynical, absurdist comedy utilized for commenting on the real world, it's actually a bleak, cynical, absurdist drama, or even, I'd go as far to say, tragedy utilized for commenting on the real world. This drama series was as close as we had gotten to genre diversity since Spawn. And I thought to myself, so close. So close. If we could just get something without the candy coating, you know, while also being a knockdown, knockout hit. Then came Castlevania, which I only watched a couple of episodes of, and totally missed the significance of it being a dark fantasy AAA until I had the realization about Invincible. To give Castlevania its due, it was another step in the right direction, but Invincible was what truly broke new ground, doing something I'm fairly sure serialized American animation oriented for either adults or family has never actually done before. In fact, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, I don't think an anime series has done it either. Invincible is deep, gripping, beautifully animated, wonderfully acted. Everything about it is 5 stars, 6 stars, 7 fucking stars. It deserves all the praise it's been getting. It is neither candy nor does it have a candy coating. Once again, there's nothing wrong with candy. I have a bit of a slackety tooth myself, but you don't want to eat candy all the time. Sometimes you want some good, juicy, long pork steak. You want some good, juicy beef steak. Invincible is steak. It has grown up for adults, and best yet, while it includes rather brutal violence, its mature credentials comes from its storytelling, themes, and nuanced morality. I could talk about all the things that make Invincible great, but there's a billion videos out there about it, done by a billion YouTubers better than me. But I'm staking my flag in on the significance of how long the episodes are. When it comes to episodic storytelling, with a set parameter for the amount of time of each section, by its nature, each chapter has an innate architecture that the creatives then build upon. How much time you have available in an episode affects many things. 20 to 30 minutes puts limitations on storytelling, structure, and technique. You can't linger on smaller ideas that make the work, well, bigger. Such things have to be cut for the sake of efficiency. For instance, in this particular temporal space in which I now exist, I once had a 20-minute deep analysis on episode 8 of Invincible, and the effect that breaking one episode into 2 episodes would have. But for efficiency's sakes, for time, I had to cut that. So instead, I'll just say breaking it up into 2 is not good. It does not work as well for this particular story. In 20-minute episodes, it's difficult to have any sort of heavily developed B plots. There are B plots, but they don't usually have the same weight as A plots. And forget about the mere existence of a C plot.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Another limitation is that the 20-minute runtimes creates limitations on how deep you can go with emotional resonance, such as the anxiety that's generated by suspense. Suspense is based on making people wait. The more time you have available to linger, the more unbroken, sustained suspense you can generate, and therefore the greater sorrow and or relief when things finally turn out however they do, for better or worse. As I'm emphasizing all these limitations, I'm a little concerned that I might be coming off as saying that 30-minute episodes are somehow a lesser form to work with. That's not my intent. It's not that 30-minute episodes, when you're given enough episodes to work with, can't be rich in character, theme, and story. After all, anime. My big point is it changes things, and by having a medium locked into one length, like being locked into a set number of genres, you don't get the full breadth of creative potential. My issue ultimately is with creative limitations that have been put on by market or long-time audience perception. There are advantages to the 30-minute runtime, just like there's an inherent danger and disadvantage in longer runtimes of 40-minute episodes, because 40 minutes of anything creates the threat of losing the audience's attention, something that Invincible I don't think ever does. I applaud all of those who craft works of art in as rigid an architecture as is provided by serialized television. What I am here to protest is not 20-minute episodes, or the comedy genre. What I protest is that AAA produces next to nothing other than comedy series where each episode is 20 to 30 minutes long. Along with everything else that's wonderful about Invincible, its runtime makes it as groundbreaking as Spawn and Aeon Flux were in the 90s. Not only because it's simply smashing, my freaky darlings, but also because it's smashing a rigid, restricted tradition for the entire medium. The tradition that it smashes is that 20-minute chapters is all creatives working in AAA, or indeed any serialized animation, should ever expect to be allotted for their stories. Even work like Invincible that would benefit from its chapters having a longer runtime. Invincible utilizes the benefits that come with its longer runtime, and doesn't fall prey to any of the disadvantages. Everything that needs the room is given the chance to linger. The time is never wasted. Nothing feels like filler. It's used to grow its world, themes, and characters. Moments and ideas are allowed time to give them such weight. Traditionally, hour-long runtimes have been reserved for live-action dramatic series. Invincible is an hour-long non-comedy animated series, and, as I've come back to several times, popular. And that's a big thing because it's necessary to get out of the ward, just like it was with the popularity of Simpsons and South Park. If those kind of shows had failed, animation would probably still just be for kids. There needed to be that critical acclaim, and Invincible is critically acclaimed. Follow the leader. Just to be safe, don't get me wrong, I do not do this out of any sort of jingoistic, nationalistic, patriotic, our American art cannot be behind other countries. No, it's just that in the 21st century, I have access to a buffet. And I'm sick of the only seasoning for adult-oriented US animated cuisine being salt, pepper, and maybe some garlic if I'm lucky. I, as a consumer of media, want more for my mind and soul. And I'm hoping Invincible, with its runtime, is a sign of the times. The time where AAA finally escapes the genre ward. I'm hoping Invincible will open the minds of consumers and companies and open the way for future creatives to all that AAA is capable of. I hope it will kick off that Cambrian explosion of AAA freedom and creativity that I have long craved. That being said, I have always felt that Spawn should have done the trick. So, I'm cautious. I'm concerned. And I could be wrong. But I fear what Invincible might result in is the door opening a crack instead of all the way. Invincible, great as it is, and I think I've gushed enough for you to know that I actually find it to be a great thing, it's still playing it safe. The superhero genre is the biggest genre in the world right now, and the animation of Invincible is intentionally designed to be reminiscent of the DCAU. It's meant to grab that audience of those who were kids and are now adults. It's a riff on the nostalgia market. Not complaining, almost everything is. Furthermore, like Spawn and Castlevania before it, it's an adaptation. My concern is we might just end up with a slew of great AAA superhero adaptations. Maybe a few will even get that 40-minute runtime, which would be awesome. It's a step, a leap in the right direction, but the genre ward would persist. Its walls just slightly expanded. I mean, as fervently as my 5-year-old self would deny it, the range of fiction does not begin and end with superheroes. What I think we need, the final step to make sure the genre ward is well and truly dead, is something that we haven't had yet. An original property. If I had the means to make or have made anything I wanted to try to shut down the ward, I would make an hour-long AAA out of one of live-action television's classic genres. Something that, in AAA, we have never had before. An original, high-end crime or mystery series. No fantasy elements, no sci-fi, but go somewhat abstract with that animation, reflective of thought processes and emotion, techniques of film noir and German expressionism. Something like The American Monster, a story that takes itself 100% seriously and finds ways to make us uncomfortable that we don't see coming, like Bojack did, but without the candy coating. To compare it to another property, an abstract animated version of something like True Detective. Just imagine it. Come on, how many more comedies do we need, bleak as they may be? And as much as it kills me to say, how many more superheroes? We don't have to do this, but we could be doing everything. Imagine my idea.
Like a lot of dreams, there's a monster at the end of it.
Better yet, imagine your own idea for what you think would break the genre award. What kind of concept would that be? Whatever you're thinking of, I bet that's awesome too. Now imagine both or all of our ideas could be out there. Sky's the limit. Wouldn't that just be great? Wouldn't that just be balls to the wall awesome? And yes, I think if something novel like that came out and its medium was AAA, and it did really well, half as well as Invincible did, I think that would finally kick down the doors that Spawn should have all those years ago. Alright. If you made it all the way here, you get a thank you for watching. Please be sure to check out my other videos and do all that stuff that I said to do at the beginning of the episode. I hope I will be seeing you all again very soon. Until then, my freaky darlings, eins, zwei, drei, and goodbye.